strange way. And which is so interesting, they had an album rock hit called Mexico, which is just great. We're going to hear that in its entirety a little bit later on. And we have with us, for the first time on the Allan Handelman Show, the lead guitarist, singer, co-founder, Jock Bartley. Great to have you on, man.
Hey, nice to be on, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I was this new album. I really love it. The first cut, which is, I guess, the single, the one that just came out, is it's kind of one of those goosebump songs. You're talking about the 60s. Let me let everybody hear just a little taste of it here, just to get an idea. And then we'll play it in its entirety. Stand by. Wow, that's brand new music from Firefall on COMET. And give us the story of how this new album came about, and I guess the 60s versus what we're going through today.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. This album, Comet, was 3 or 4 years in the making, and it started with pretty much, I talked Mark Andes, our bassist, who was the bass player in the great band Spirit from the late 60s in L.A., I talked Mark into that we should start playing Nature's Way, which was that environmental anthem that Randy California wrote, which came out in early 1970.
Yep.
Kind of a hippie song, and it was really a great tune. And Mark said, "Sure." So we started playing Nature's Way live, and it got such a great response that we took it one step further and thought we should re-record Nature's Way and maybe put it on a new album. And the thing about Firefall that still amazes me, 40 years later, is that we had direct ties to the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield and Poco and Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris and all those great bands from the 60s and early 70s. And the history of our band is really pretty amazing and frankly fated, that we all got together and made a couple of records that sound so great still today. Michael Clark, the drummer from the Byrds, was in our band. Mark Andes from Spirit. Rick Roberts, who replaced Graham Parsons in the Flying Burrito Brothers. And Graham had turned the Byrds into a country direction for an album or two. So we have this long genealogy and family tree in the history of Firefall. And once we started playing Nature's Way, which was a great song from Spirit and Randy California and Mark and all the guys in Spirit, I started playing around with the song that I wanted to be kind of like an old Byrds song.
Yeah, it has that flavor. It has a goosebump invoking sound that the Byrds had.
Yeah, and we have our friend, the great guitar player John Jorgensen, playing 12-string guitar on the song.
Yeah.
And and when I wrote the first verse, and you just played it, the Beatles and the Stones and the Byrds, and Dylan wrote the words. When I wrote that first verse, and then sang the chorus, it was like I went, "Oh, great! This is 1960s, baby." I also knew that the year I would be talking about in that first verse wasn't 1964 when the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan Show and pretty much changed America totally.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1965 when the Byrds came out. So what's kind of funny is I knew that then my second verse would be 1967 and my third verse would be 1969. And what I did was I Googled 1967 top 100 hit songs. And suddenly there's Aretha Franklin and there's the Young Rascals or the Rascals with Groovin' and all these great bands and songs. Same thing with 1969 with Led Zeppelin and Crosby, Stills and Nash.
You're right.
Something in the way she moved by the Beatles and the band. I mean, Firefall had the amazing fortune and great honor to open the band's last tour, that they played in 1976 before they went out to California and made the Last Waltz movie.
Right.
And, so, I tried to take all that specific information, Aretha Franklin and all of that, and include it in my storyline of the guy and his girl going through the late 60s and having it be the best years of their lives. And I have to say, I'm really proud of that song. One or two of the guys in the band said it may be the best song I ever wrote, which they may be right, I don't know. We're just so happy to have that start the record out because, it does harken back to those times. And if I may,
sure.
So the 60s, the Beatles basically showed the world that the guys in the band could write the songs. Until that time, not too many bands wrote their own songs. And so suddenly the Beatles and the Stones and everybody was writing their own songs and actually making a lot of money from it, too. So that was a great byproduct. But all that great music of the 60s really directly led into the music of the 70s. And, the 70s with the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield and Poco and Loggins and Messina and, Bread in America and the Eagles, of course.
Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. That whole genre.
Just everybody.
Yeah.
Was just, as the music business was wide open and, bands were allowed to be who they were and write the songs they were and sound like who they sounded like and not try to be something else. And Firefall was very, very fortunate, perfect timing with our great first album that we made, to play a small role in the 1970s music. And God, our first tour in 1976 was 3 months long, a month with the Doobie Brothers. Then when they went home, we went and joined the band with Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm and all of that for a month. And then we went and joined Fleetwood Mac during the White Album. And then because Fleetwood Mac really liked our material and we were a good opening act for a 30 or 35-minute set, when Rumors came out in 77, we got to play a lot of dates with Fleetwood Mac during Rumors, which was 50 to 100,000 people a day. So talk about lucky and just fortunate. Perfect timing.
Unbelievable, yes. And not to mention, there's so many things that come to my mind as you're talking about that. You put it so well, but not to mention the turbulent times that what we went through back then. And even though it's totally different turbulence, what we're going through now and what we just went through for 4 years and then this year with the virus.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Totally unbelievable.
So, yeah.
But you know what? That kind of fits in without getting into any of that. But just unbelievable what's been going on in America. Hopefully we're turning a new corner as of today.
Yes.
But the one thing that I will say is, that as Mark Andy says in the introduction on the video on Way Back When, which, by the way, my son Jamey made the video, which was just kind of like a pictorial of the music of the 60s and the hippies and Woodstock and all that. It's really great. But music, I think, is going to get us through this time, or at least hope. And the one reason that I'm so happy that our record label agreed with Mark Andes and I to put our record out. It's been done for over a year. We were going to put COMET out in January, and then all of a sudden the pandemic happened, and us, like everybody else in the music industry, just put everything on hold. I'm really glad we didn't wait like most artists and bands are waiting with their new album to put out in the spring or the summer of 2021. It's really great having new music out now in this pandemic year that everybody's kind of looking for, some, diversions and everything. And even though, I know our manager's kind of freaked out because usually when you put out an album, you go out on the road to push the album and we can't do that. We had 40 or 50 gigs cancel in 2020. Some of them got rescheduled to 2021, and we may not be playing until June or July of this year, which would mean almost a year and a half of no gigs, which is good. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah. Wow.
But to go back to my point, I'm really glad we have new music out, and particularly a song like A Real Fine Day, which is number 2 on the record, is such a happy, positive, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, it really fits today for me. I mean, you talk about outlook for the future. There's some bright light down the road,
Exactly. And I know that, we tour, when we tour a lot, in 2019 and before, and hopefully in mid-2021 and on, we tour with groups like America and Poco and Pure Prairie League and Orleans and Atlanta Rhythm Section and Ambrosia and a lot of great bands from the 70s that have great songs. I know that we're all really looking forward to getting back out on the road, and Firefall for sure is looking to add a couple of these new songs from Comet into our set.
Yep. If you just tuned in, this is Jock Bartley, the founding member, one of the founding members, and that's another thing. One of the founding members of Firefall. You have 3 of the original members. How many bands from that time period have that many original members today?
Yeah, very few.
Yeah.
And, I just know as leader of the band, and I own the name, that kind of happened the way the cookie crumbled back in the early 80s. And I kept the band going. I'm so fortunate to have Mark Andes on bass, who's a huge rock star. He was in Heart for 12 or 15 years of the 1980s into the 90s. Mark is an amazing guy and an amazing bass player. And David Muse on sax, flute, keyboards, our original color man. And as producer of this record, I have to say that Allan, that I really wanted at least half of the record, if not more than half, to sound a lot like Firefall of our best records of the 1970s.
Sure.
Because that's what we're remembered for Mexico, for Livin' A Livin', for Just Remember I Love You, etc. Strange Way. And one of the things that was, now to me, the biggest thing to our success back in those days was how good the songs were. The songs were incredible. You Are the Woman, Cinderella, all those great songs. The synergy of the band and the music recreated would be number 2. But one of the things that Firefall was known for was the interplay of my lead guitar with David Muse's sax and flute. And that was pretty unique back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to include at least some of that on this record, Comet. One sidelight that I'll tell you about that was so amazing was when I started, I was playing with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris. I met Rick Roberts when we played in New York City, and Rick Roberts had, of course, replaced Graham Parsons in the Flying Breeder Brothers. In fact, pretty much it was Rick Roberts and Chris Hillman who discovered Emmylou Harris and turned Graham on to Emmylou, and then suddenly I fell into Graham and Emmylou's band. But when Rick and I started getting together to play music in Boulder, Colorado, I think in 1974, it was going to maybe be for a third solo record of his. But when Mark Andes, a rock star from L.A., would move to the mountains above Boulder, like so many rock stars did back then, Stephen Stills, Chris Hillman, Richie Fury, Joe Walsh, Dan Fogelberg, Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys, suddenly Boulder became this amazing hotbed of national music.
Yeah.
When we had our, it felt like a band when Mark got involved. And Rick said, I know this singer-songwriter who has great songs, Larry Burnett out of D.C., and we should get him out here. And Rick had a tape of Larry playing Cinderella. And Mark and I, our mouths dropped open and went, get him out here.
Yeah.
And And from our first day of practice with Rick and Larry, me and Mark, and a drummer who would last about a month before Michael Clark came onto the scene, we had 20 to 25 original songs to play from our first day of practice on. And what was so amazing, Alan, was that, that first week when we started rehearsing and see what we sounded like and get Rick and Larry singing together and Mark and I playing together, we had songs like Livin' Ain't Livin' in Mexico and Cinderella that would be on our first album a year and a half later, and we had those from the first couple of days of practice.
That's amazing how much you got out of that first album. It was so huge. I mean, it went certified gold faster than any other album, and it was your debut album.
When you said that first, it went faster gold than any other album previously on Atlantic Records.
I see. Okay.
And the thing is that blows my mind still because, the Stones, the Rolling Stones were on
Zeppelin,
and Aretha Franklin,
yeah,
and the Rascals, and and all these amazing bands. Ray Charles, for us to own that. I don't know if it's still the same, but at 1976, that album came out and just saturated the radio and climbed the charts.
You're absolutely right.
And
finish your sentence. Go ahead. I just want to interject stuff. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that led directly to us touring with the top bands of the day out of the box, including, like I said, the Doobies, the band, Fleetwood Mac, but also Lynyrd Skynyrd before the plane crash, and Chicago, the Beach Boys, and all. We were on the road with the top bands playing stadium shows, within our first summer, which is, how many young bands that put out an album can hope for that? Not too many.
Back in that, it was a very interesting time, too, because that country rock flavor mixed so well with the harder stuff that was on top 40 radio and album rock radio. And you kind of bridged that gap. And Mexico was an album rock hit. That's one of my favorite songs of all time. But let's talk about some great stories. You are the woman. Hey,
you know what? Before we talk about You Are the Woman.
Yeah.
Since you brought up Mexico, let me tell you one of my great stories.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, when I was young, my mom, who was a musician, got me, with a very famous jazz guitar player, Johnny Smith, to be my teacher. And he was grooming me to be the next little jazz prodigy. And that was going fine until, 1964 and the Beatles came on TV. And suddenly I wanted to be in a rock band. And a few years later, I heard Eric Clapton play solos. And literally the skies opened up and, wow, that's possible. I want to do that. Be a lead guitar player and just burn on a track. And so the story is, which is pretty amazing, when we made our first album in the winter of 1975, down in Criteria Studios, everybody was recording there. The Bee Gees were down the corner. Stephen Stills was down the hall. When it was time for me to do my solo on Mexico, I knew that was going to be kind of one of the main places for me to shine as a lead guitar player. So I'm warming up out in the recording room. A lot of people are in and out of the control room, I can see. And I'm warming up and getting my amp sounding good and my fingers working. Producer says, "Hey, are you ready, Jock? Let's go." I said, "Sure." So he plays the song and I start playing, and it's going great. I'm playing really good. Sounds great. I'm first verse, second verse. The day before, we had recorded that mariachi horn section in the middle of my solo, which I'd never played with that before.
Mm-hmm.
Had no idea where it was even coming. And so I'm playing along. My solo's going. My solo sounds good. But I know in the back of my mind, someplace the horns are going to start playing. And suddenly there they are. And I stopped and then I played. They came in, I stopped, I played. It was a first time thing that I'd ever played with the horns. And I finished the song out. and ended up playing a one-take performance of 3.5 minutes of Mexico. And the producer pushes the red light and says, "That was fantastic. Come on in." And I went, "Well, thanks, but, I didn't know what was happening with the horns. Keep what I did on tape, and let me see if I can beat that. Okay?" And he went, "No, come on in." I went, "Jim, let me see if I can beat the horn section part, because I think I can play it better." And Jim Mason, the producer, pushed the button and said, "No, come on in." So I take my guitar off. I'm a little ticked off. I've been working toward that song, for 2 years, and it was going to be my moment in Mexico. So I take my guitar off and kind of storm into the control room, and the first person I see is my guitar hero, Eric Clapton, who's been watching me play really good.
Oh, man. That had to be the huge rush. Oh, boy.
Unbelievable. I kind of turned into Jackie Gleason, and I kind of crawled over to him, and he stood up and he shook my hand. He said, "Keen playing, man." And he walked out. That's the only time I ever met my hero, Eric Clapton.
But he was there when you were playing, and if you knew he was there, you would never have been able to do it without being a nervous wreck.
That's exactly what I was going to say. If I'd known he was there, I probably wouldn't have been able to even pick up a pick, much less play anything good. So it was a fated kind of deal that I played one of my one of my best solos on record when my hero was watching me, even though I didn't know he was there yet. So anyway, there's my Eric Clapton story.
That's a great story. The one I was going to bring up was, it's interesting. You Are the Woman. You actually said that some of the guys in the band didn't even like that song, let alone wanting it to be a hit. But isn't that funny? That Atlantic Records loved it.
Well, it's kind of true, because You Are the Woman, Rick Roberts, who wrote You Are the Woman, who we had two amazing writers in the band. Rick Roberts, who wrote a lot of formula type of songs, and he wanted to get women and girls to call radio stations and, request his songs, and he had a formula. And, You Are the Woman and Just Remember I Love You are right in the middle of his formula. Larry Burnett, on the other hand, wrote these songs that were like a purging of his soul, and it'd be like, and there it was. So we had such a wide variety of songs. So we had most of an album ready to go when we were about to go make our first record in the winter of 1975. And Rick had just written this new song. He says, "What do you guys think of this?" And it was You Are the Woman. And our producer, Jim Mason, just his eyes lit up and went, "There it is." He could hear that it was going to be a hit record, and a few of the guys in the band, kind of thought, well, that's really kind of poppy and white bread, and, all of our other material is, better than that.
Mm-hmm.
But we were smart enough as a band when we worked it out, to hear that this was a love ballad that really might get us on the radio a lot.
Right.
And kind of as an afterthought, that song was put on our first record, and then became, when Atlantic Records heard that song, they knew that was going to be the big single, and they were smart enough to not put it out first, with Firefall being a brand new band. They put out Livin' Ain't Livin' in the springtime or something, and then followed it with You Are the Woman, which jumped into the top 10 in state pretty much for 6 or 8 months.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know they released that other song first. Okay, yeah, that is smart, because why waste something strong that might get lost in the shuffle,
Yeah, or people go, "Who's Firefall?"
Right.
Not that Livin' Ain't Livin' got into the top 40, but it introduced our name to the music industry and to radio people, and then boom, You Are the Woman. And to have a hit like that big, which by the way has gotten over 7 million radio airplays in the United States alone, I've been asked on recent interviews, so do you still enjoy playing You Are the Woman? Your big hit. And I always answer, and it's the absolute truth, Firefall is so lucky to have a hit that big. and people will spend a lot of money to come and just hear that song. Or, how many people got married to that song? Or, I kissed my girlfriend on the first date with that song, and blah, 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 all these great things. I know how lucky we are, and believe me, as having toured for 3 years like I have in bands, I know that there's a lot of artists out there who have a hit song that they can't stand anymore, and so they change it and they put a new groove to it, or
That's
do
right.
something different.
Yeah.
So that the people who are buying the tickets don't even recognize it at first, and then they kind of look at each other going, "Hey, this is my favorite song," a minute in or something.
That's right. And a lot of times fans don't like that. They want to hear what they remember, and
Exactly.
Rick Roberts. It's interesting. Rick Roberts didn't even want you guys didn't even play "You Are the Woman" in the early '80s because he was sick of it.
That's right. He didn't want to.
Yeah.
He was sick of it, and I remember arguing with him. He said, "Rick, that's our biggest hit. We have to play it." Nah, that was 4 years ago. We don't need to play, But, to have a hit record, I don't think that most bands and musicians, and particularly the public, doesn't realize how difficult and basically impossible to have a hit record that's on saturation radio play. A lot of times, there's just so many factors, and the music business is kind of stacked against bands, and particularly new bands, unless you have just a song that does that. So I'm so fortunate and blessed to be in a band that has not only a hit as big as "You Are the Woman," but we have 4 or 5 other songs that people pay really good money, 25 years later to come hear them. And
right.
As the band leader, I keep a really tight rein on most of those songs. "You Are the Woman," "Just Remember I Love You," "Strange Way," "Cinderella." All of those songs we need to perform as close to the record that people remember as we can do it, right?
Right.
And we do.
Yep.
Now, I say that knowing that on "Mexico" or "Strange Way" at the end for David on the flute, or "Livin' Ain't Livin'" as a solo guy, we can take the music new places every night if that's where it goes. And I have total freedom as a lead guitar player to, when we're playing Mexico live, go somewhere totally new if it comes out that way.
Right.
So I really, and I would understand it if I didn't have those kind of songs. It'd be kind of hard to go just play hey, let's go play the record, which so many bands do. So I got the best of both worlds here in Firefall, with songs that we want to sound just like the Sun, and then songs that we can stretch out a bit.
There was a mentality for a while that a lot of bands didn't want to have a top 40 hit because they were really seeking album rock recognition. And when they did have top 40 hits, like the Guess Who, it was a problem for them because they didn't get respect on album rock, which most of their cuts was album rock. And
right.
I could see, even AC/DC, when they had Back in Black, and I know because I know these bands and they've been on the show and they've talked about it. When the You Shook Me All Night Long became a hit, during the Back in Black tour, they never played it because they didn't want the fans to think they were just pushing a hit. So they didn't even play it during the first tour or that tour.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I agree with what you said earlier, which was, that Firefall kind of bridged the gap from the country rock and to pop music. I mean, a lot of people still think we're country rock, and frankly, I don't really understand that, other than our history with the Byrds and the Burrito Brothers and the Poco stuff. That's a reason. And Cinderella, I guess, sounds a little country rockish, but the great thing about the songs we had on our first few records is that there was a wide variety. And I mean, like on our third album that had Strange Way on it, we also had a song called Get You Back by Larry Burnett, which was so hard rocking, and we loved playing that. So we almost had 2 Firefalls going, the poppy love song Firefall and the hard-edged, Firefall. So, it's great. I just know how lucky I am. And I wanted this new album to to stand up and be counted along with those first 3 Firefall records. And, I think we succeeded. I'm really happy with how it turned out.
This is a great album.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I just wanted to, on Mexico, so having said that I wanted, at least half, if not more, of the album to really sound like Firefall, I kept thinking in my head in the past few years, we need a new song like Mexico. We need a new Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
We need a new Mexico. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went on and I went, a new Mexico or New Mexico.
And it's on this album. It is on this album. Yeah.
I wrote this song so I could play all those those Firefall kind of licks. And it's off of the hat to Rick Roberts' song in Mexico. Certainly not plagiarized anything, but, I wanted to write a song that was kind of like Mexico. So I wrote a New Mexico.
And it's on, this is the new album we're talking about from Firefall. It's called COMET. And we were talking before about Nature's Way is on this album. It's just, it's good. So it's great stuff. And by the way, we're going to play these songs in their entirety on our radio version of this interview and online, just some samples. But I got to tell you, this is an album you need to listen to. I'm so happy it came out now. This is the time. It's almost like if it came out maybe too early, people were just too stressed out to really even deal with it because they don't want to let their brain get into, I don't know, if sometimes you get into such a rut with the news, you're not in the mood for music. I hate to say that, but now you are. And
there's always a lot of people who need that bright shining light in their own personal darkness, but a lot of people don't like bright lights in their darkness. They want to kind of trudge through it all. And, the pandemic and having 400,000 plus people dead in the United States is just such a tragedy. But, I can only do what I can do. And what I do best is play guitar and write songs and hopefully be a good band leader on a band. And we're so happy with this record. And you mentioned Nature's Way. When we finished it and Mark was really excited about it, he decided to ask his friend Timothy B. Schmidt from the Eagles if Timothy would sing on it with him. And Timothy said, absolutely, was honored because when Timothy was growing up in Sacramento in high school, his favorite band was Spirit, and he would drive anywhere around California to hear Spirit play and watch his hero on the bass, Mark Andes, play.
That's so cool.
Timothy said, sure. And then John McPhee from the Doobie Brothers, our old friend, played guitar and pedal steel on it, and it was just a really great thing, kind of honoring and looking back at the 70s with, 1970 with Nature's Way, but also my song Way Back When, which takes you back to the late 60s and all those great bands.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is very, very cool. I'm always happy when a band I loved from the past is back with new music, especially when you're lucky enough to have 3 founding members. Jock Bartley, it was so good having you on the Allan Handelman Show. It's awesome talking to you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the airplay and the exposure. Because nowadays, without there's not that many record stores, and CDs are obsolete, and and there's so many streaming services where I don't know how songwriters make money nowadays.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
They pretty much don't. So the exposure that we get from your great show, Alan, we appreciate it, and we think we have a lot of great songs that people will love.
Well, listen, for those of you who are tuned into the radio, turn it up. Thank you again, man.
Thank you very much. We'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Want to have you back. Jock Bartley.
Thank you, Alan.
Bye-bye, man.
Stay safe out there. Stay safe out there, everybody.
Thank you. You too.